Welcome to Flip Lesson 96 for 5th grade as we look at dividing fractions. We've gone through a number of different steps looking at how fractions work, multiplying fractions, look at some of the basic principles of fractions like how many fit into the number 1 and coming up with the idea of reciprocals. And now we want to really put all this stuff together to understand how do you actually divide fractions. Where are these numbers coming from? And so we can start with this example problem. It says how much of 2/3 is in 1/2. Right? So basically what we're saying is if I take this 2/3 right here and I want to put that inside of the 1/2, how much of the 2/3 is actually in the 1/2? Now, you can see that for the most part I've covered up everything except for this little section right in here. All right. Now if I take these, let's see if I can get them together. There we go. If I take them back, we see basically we covered, that's not what I wanted to draw, right? Half would have been this red line, and this is what was still visible, this red stuff right here. So what we can see here and what we see here is that this much of the shape is still left. Well, how much of the shape is that? Well, what we can do is we can actually take this 2/3 and we can think about it like this. This black line right here represents half of the 2/3, right? So if we were to divide this like this and a black line like this, we could say we'd have 1, 2, 3, 4 parts in our 2/3, right? And so in the end, we would say that's, well, 1, 2, 3 out of the 4 parts fit into 1/2, right? 3 out of the 4 parts that we divided our 2/3 into fit into the 1/2, right? And so in the end, we would say that 3 of the 4 parts of the 2/3 fit in the 1/2. Or very simply put, 1/2 divided by 2/3 equals 3/4. Now, if we could draw pictures every time and really understand how to draw fractions real well, that might be enough. But there must be something much easier to do, much more simple to really understand where these numbers come from. And that's what we want to look at, of how do we actually divide, right? Now, when it comes to dividing fractions, how do we get this 3/4? We've proved it with our picture, but how do we do that mathematically? And what we're going to do is we're going to follow a process of using reciprocals and using multiplication in the end. So this is what we're going to do. Here's a fundamental rule that we want to follow. When we divide by a fraction, we're actually going to multiply by its reciprocal. Now you say, well, that just sounds really confusing, but let's actually do it. All right, let's do the math. If we multiply by the reciprocal, so 1 times 3 equals 3, and 2 times 2 equals 4, that gave us our answer of 3/4. And we proved it up here in our picture that, yes, it does equal 3/4. So this process must work. To divide by a fraction, you multiply by its reciprocal. And so what we literally did here is we took this, and the first thing we did was we flipped the sign, right? Opposite. The opposite of divide is multiply. And then we took our fraction and we flipped it into the reciprocal, right? This is our R for reciprocal. And then we were able to solve for this problem. All right, that's the fundamentals. That's part 1. We'll come back and try a couple more in part 2. Okay, welcome back to part 2 of the video, and we looked at this idea that to divide by a fraction, we're going to multiply by the reciprocal. So we're going to go right into this, and we're going to try this out. Okay, so when we divide by a fraction here, we have 2/3 divided by 1/6, and we want to see what kind of answer we get. All right, so step number 1 is our first fraction doesn't change at all. Our first number doesn't change at all. And so that one's just going to go straight down. Right? Second step is, okay, we're going to flip the sign, right? And so if we flip the sign, we got to make it multiply. After we multiply, now we're going to do the reciprocal. Okay, so this is what we need the reciprocal of. So what's the reciprocal of 1/6? Really, that's how many 1/6s fit into 1, right? Because the reciprocal times each other is going to equal 1. And so really, we're just going to flip it, right? So the 1 is going to go to the bottom, and the 6 is going to go to the top, and we have our reciprocal now. Since we've solved for our reciprocal, now we can actually solve the problem. Numerator times numerator, which gives us 12. And then 3 times 1, denominator times denominator, which gives us 3. From here, we can say, wait a minute, that fraction is an improper fraction. Improper fractions, we can reduce those. So really this is saying 12 divided by 3, which we can take, you could start by reducing it, or you could just divide it out. And I don't know why I wrote that division sign. I was about to reduce, but I'm just going to go right into 12 divided by 3 equals 4. So the answer is 2/3 divided by 1/6 is 4. And that's mathematically how to do it. Now we could go back and we could draw a picture and we could show the proving it. But because we know this theory, we know this theory is correct. And so we have a correct answer. Well, what about whole numbers? 3 divided by 1/5. How are we going to do this? Well, the good news is we already talked about this, is that whole numbers can be turned into fractions in a very easy step. So step number 1 is we're going to turn this number into a fraction. But it's not going to be the reciprocal. It's still just going to be the fraction. So 3/1 is in fraction form. Step number 2 then is we're going to flip our sign. Flip the sign so it's multiply. And then step number 3 is we want to flip this so that we have our reciprocal. So 1/5 flipped is going to be 5/1. And now we can multiply. Right? Numerator times numerator gives us an answer of 15. Denominator times denominator gives us an answer of 1. And my 5 looks a little funny. So our 15 divided by 1, of course, that gives us an answer of 15. So we have that idea. And it makes perfect sense, right? Because if I draw a circle and I divide it into fifths, that looks kind of like that. Right? I can see there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in 1. So if I have 3, that would make sense. If there's 5 in 1, 15 in 3, that makes a lot of sense. So we have that idea. So here's our first look at dividing fractions. Right? Following that pattern, understanding the pictures and how the relationship works. Going with the process of flipping the symbol, then flipping the second fraction, which is the reciprocal. Right? Here we did it again. Flip the symbol, flip the second fraction, right? The first fraction right here, this one stayed the same. That one didn't change. And how do we handle whole numbers? Right? First step, if we have a whole number, we're going to first change that into a fraction, and then we can change the symbol and find the reciprocal and solve. So here are your sample problems. How many 1/2s are in 3/4 and how many 6s are in 1/7? Make sure you're reading those carefully as you solve this. That's lesson 96.